Signs of the Southland, Monday, January 16th, 2023. Mr. Grant, tell me about Jameer Gibson.
Yeah, I know I can't be the only person that did a double take, but Georgia Tech track and field's newest, I guess I would say, bona fide star is Jameer Gibson. He's an Army transfer, studying and getting his master's at Georgia Tech as a grad transfer in civil engineering. He's taken the world by storm after setting multiple Army, Patriot League, and Service Academy records. He also adds Georgia Tech's weight throw record at 20.4 meters, which is pretty impressive. And I honestly believe that in 6 years of writing, maybe 7 now, Yellow Jacket Roundup, I've never even mentioned us having a notable finish in the weight throw. So yeah, this is a nice ad. And then he won the shot put too, just for good measure.
Very, very cool. I mean, the name is striking to say the
Hmm.
least. Just on the balance of that alone.
At least both names are just slightly different spellings, just enough.
I
Yeah.
uh I, I will say, writing out the column yesterday, I had visions of Jameer Gibbs vaulting over a Louisville defender on the goal line, and I smiled fondly, remembering what was. But no, it's great to have him aboard, even though I'm pretty sure we're only getting him for one season before he joins the Army Corps of Engineers, which is heck of a way to use your tech engineering degree.
Someone really wanted to avoid saying hell of a way to use an engineering degree, didn't they? Moving right along, you'll see Jameer Gibson, not Jameer Gibbs, at a Vandy Invitational track and field meet on January 20th. Last intro item of the day, Mr. Purdy, tell me about Chris Eubanks and the
Chris
Australian Open.
Eubanks is currently not on the North American continent because he is in Australia, in Melbourne, at the Australian Open. He won his first round match against a South Korean whose name I have forgotten already. I also don't remember
Quan?
who. Yes, Kwan. And then I also did not research who he's playing in round two, but he would play tomorrow night at some point between 7 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. start time on the East Coast, if I have my range of start times correct for the Australian Open singles. So we got a tech guy getting down. Hey, this is good. Setting the path for Mr. Martin maybe one day to
It
get
was
some
it
rounds in Melbourne.
it was interesting to hear about Eubanks getting that wild card. I think one of our writers was mentioning, oh, the US Open and the Australian Open have this swap situation with their wild cards where the USTA gives a wild card to an Australian player and the Australian Open gives a wild card to an American player, but the American player is usually younger, whereas Eubanks is like what, 28, 29.
Yeah.
So the selection criteria there at least was a little interesting.
I don't know enough to whether this speaks to that we don't have talent in the American youth right now to find someone younger than Chris to put in the Australian Open. Um, Men's U.S.
I
tennis
the
is in the best spot it's been though in a long time since James Blake.
I would for American like international sports, I would always follow the Team USA Tracker Twitter account. They Whoever runs it has an infinite amount of time to follow an infinite amount of Americans doing an infinite amount of niche sports. Infinite amount of sports just across the world. It's very fun to follow and tune in occasionally if you're very into the very like, hey, maybe I only watch this every 4 years, but yeah, I'll turn into like this weekend. I was like, oh, I
Well,
only
I mean,
watch a sport every 4 years, but I'll tune into the checks and notes FISU University Games speed skating competition.
I would if you have Peacock. Michaela Schifrin will be going to break Lindsey Vohn's record at her next slalom or Grand Prix event or whatever they call it in international skiing. But all these things are only on Peacock, so I couldn't watch her last attempts, which made me really mad because I don't have that yet.
Would be nice to have the Olympic
Ooh.
channel back, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Remember when you used to get all the channels on one box?
Mm.
Man, what a concept.
It's all cable now. It's all cable again. Speaking of mediocre outcomes, let's talk about Georgia Tech basketball. The men's basketball team first, they put together two losses this week at Notre Dame and at Pittsburgh. And then women's basketball also put together two losses this week. The women lost versus Miami at home, and then again versus Duke. Let's talk about the men first. Mr. Grant, let's start with the Notre Dame game. What you got for me?
Yeah, so Notre Dame is a place where Georgia Tech has typically or traditionally been snake bitten, I think is a fair thing to say. I believe the last time we've won there on the road is 1990. And ever since Notre Dame joined the ACC, we've played on the road there every year. So that should give you a bit of a sense of the kind of just general bad luck that befalls them up at the pavilion at the Joyce Center. But yeah, and that's a Notre Dame team that Josh Pastner has very much said in the past that he very much looks up to Mike Brey, the get old, stay old model that they've had there for quite some time. And again, not to say that Georgia Tech has universally struggled with Notre Dame. We've played them some very interesting and exciting wins here at home. But anyway, all that to say, it was an overtime game which Tech led very late. They led by 7 with 2.5 to play, kind of the inverse of the Miami situation, I guess one might say, but this did go to overtime. It's one of those games where, they played well on the glass. It's one of the first times we've seen Tech really out-rebound the other team this year. Their turnovers were higher than they have been, but it was a pretty even game, blocks, turnovers, steals type situation. And really what it came down to, I would say, at least, was just a little bit different cadence in terms of the effectiveness from three. They shot more threes and made less threes. That'll make the difference in the game. And then just, something we've seen all year and is definitely a theme we'll talk about against Pittsburgh, but just being relatively ineffective inside the circle. Really hard to win if you're not making the short range, high percentage shots, the layups, the shot from the elbow. And we've long had very effective presences in that paint for Pastner. And I think this is just a game where, especially when it only comes down to one more make here or there, it really shows not having kind of that outlet in the middle, which really helps open up the floor for the other guys as well.
Let me get you some stats here real quick before we move on to the Pitt game. Versus Notre Dame, Javon Franklin, 45 minutes, 12 points, 5 for 7 from the field, 12 total rebounds. Rodney Howard, 13 minutes, 33% for the field, but only took 3 shots, 2 points. Lance Terry, 35 minutes, unfortunately 1 for 9 from the field, 0 for 4 from 3, 4 total points on the night. A very rough game after what looked like a very bright spot for him versus Miami, right?
Yeah, and if you're going to keep going down the box score, you'll notice Debo Coleman, again, about 28 minutes, 2 for 8 field goals, 0 for 6 from 3. The two of them take a pretty high volume of shots. It's Lance and Debo. And, going 0 for 10 combined from 3 is tough. And it just seems that, Debo's like he's had I'd say fairly good shot selection. It kind of comes out in the wash during a game, but he's just been a hair off, and that's something that is, I wouldn't really say is a pointing fingers or a fault per se, but it's something that just makes it really tough to win a ball game when you're that cold on that many attempts.
Another thing that came up during this game, you mentioned that Pastner usually has a bunch of size, or traditionally has had size in the paint. In this game, Notre Dame sort of always played their 2 really tall guys. I don't have their names on hand in front of me, but maybe I can, scheme it up based on the rebound numbers. I want to say it's Goodwin and Lasweski. I'm going to guess. Lashevsky.
It's like Krzyzewski, but Lashevsky.
But yeah, so they usually have those 2 guys on the court for the whole game. They played 42 minutes each, and they were able to keep. They dominated the boards for the most part defensively.
It's not that hard to beat Tech right now on the guy side with really good paint presence. The rebounding's not as great as before. I think Pastner maybe wanted Davon to be more active in the paint as well, even though without the height, just at least be just a guy that scrums and makes chaos happen, and he's not getting much playing time, and he was sick.
I will say,
there was a bug going through the team that is important to mention.
I do want to note Davon in this game, 36 minutes, 10 rebounds. He's Tech's second highest rebounder. And Tech did out rebound Notre Dame 42-33, including 14 offensive rebounds. I would not really say that rebounding was the issue on the day.
Not in that game, I guess. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I think Smith pulling down a double. But I think that was probably true with Pitt.
Offensively, I would say that's still a problem, just in general, because Howard's. I mean, I think if you get the eye test on Rodney Howard, for me, is his hand. The height's there, but he just does not have the hands to not be effective against average people in the paint.
Now looking
are
at
continually a problem.
Now looking at this again, look at this a little bit more closely. It's very weird that Tech out rebounded on the whole Notre Dame, despite them playing what seemed to be 2 7-footers for 42 minutes each the entire game. But I think this kind of gets chalked up to Georgia Tech and Notre Dame have literally never played a normal game ever. And I think that's a great place to leave that one. Let's move over to the Pitt game.
Again, maybe too early to say it's a super Saturday, but they did have tennis and men's basketball both on Saturday. Anyways, Tech played Pitt. It was 60-71, to borrow the Akshay way of reading scores, which I dislike. I don't know why I did that. Anyways,
now I remember why I forgot this game.
Pitt was essentially a completely different team than we saw last year. I think only one of their players was back, or maybe it was one of their starters. I can't remember. They did have a little bit more height than Notre Dame. They were able to score, I would say, pretty effectively. But unlike Notre Dame, unlike Georgia Tech in both games, I'd argue, Pittsburgh really concentrated their scoring into 3-4 guys, but in particular Jamarius Burton and Nick Sabandi, 21 and 19 apiece for Sabandi and Burton, and that's pretty significant, right? They're guys who were very effective in terms of getting to the dish and getting points. 16 for 13, 7 for 12 from the field for those two. Sabandi was 3 for 6 from 3. Critically, both were very effective at the line. They went 7 for 7 and 4 for 4 apiece. And Pitt went 17 for 20 on free throw attempts when Tech only got to the stripe 3 times in a game decided by 11 points. That is brutal. Weirdly, the foul discrepancy is not that high, 16-12. I could rant and put on the tinfoil hat about this a little bit. Very weird to see one of the refs constantly in the Pitt huddle, but this is not a podcast for pointing fingers per se. I will leave that there. All I will say is that is a striking difference. 17 more attempts and 17 more points from the stripe in an 11-point game. That's been a theme of Tech games, I'd say, for probably about 2 years. It's just not getting to the line nearly as much as the other team, whether that's an us problem or someone else nefarious problem. That's not this podcast's place to judge. I know that's a lot of words, but what I want to come back around to is Georgia Tech was not horribly ineffective from 3. 12 for 29 kept them in this game. What they lacked was drawing fouls that were shooting, making the frugal number of free throws that they got, and they were rather poor in the paint and inside the arc. 24 for 66 overall, made field goals. And if you subtract out the threes, you're down to about 12 of them, which is not really what you want in terms of effectiveness down low. Not to be too much of a rain cloud, I will say Davon Smith, 15 points, led the way. He had another double-double. That's his second straight double-double. And Debo Coleman bounced back, 3 for 8 from 3, 5 for 12 overall with 13 points. So, not a great day. Terry had another quiet day. Jalen Moore didn't play a ton coming off an injury. So, just pretty quiet other than Davon and Debo. And, this is a team that has a lot of talent. I agree with Passner when they say that he has more than 5 starters, but it's a lot of high floor is what we've seen. And I don't think we've seen close to the ceiling except maybe the Miami game.
I don't know if I've outright said this before, but the high starters thing kind of cuts both ways, or 5 starters thing cuts both ways.
Yep.
It's either you have more than 5 good players, or you have more than 5 players that are about the same quality.
Yep.
You can kind of look. They're a younger team, and we'll talk about the women in a sec. They just both of these teams have a lot of trouble gelling, and to use this as an inexpensive segue, I think you saw that a lot for the women versus Miami and Duke,
Oh, for
in that
sure.
they just could not get consistency and they could not hang on to when they had something cooking, they just couldn't keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, let's start with the Miami game. You have here listed at the top line. They have had an offense to their quote unquote burly defensive ball.
Yeah, the, these last couple of games, Duke and Miami included, have felt the closest to how they played Duke. I mean, not how they played Duke, how they played UConn last year, which I think was the best version of Fortner ball at Tech, which is really strong defense across the board, and then in order to beat a team that should beat you, just milk a ton of clock on the offensive end and manufacture and just make enough of them to where you win, but you don't, but you prevent a lot of chances on the other end the opposing team trying to score, and it just visually just looked like that again. I mean, she admitted in the press conference, was it after Miami or the game before, that like they just don't have the talent to do the quick offense thing that they wanted to do initially. Bianca Jackson and Cam have not been able to do that. They're spot shooters. They're not point guards in the sense of like really creating a lot of things for other people. Like they don't play like they're closer to James Harden than they are to Trae Young to do an NBA comp. In terms of style, Kayla Blackshear is effectively running both sides of the floor right now. She's got double doubles in both these games. Is the only rebounder that's doing much of anything down there. And then was making shots too. She was 7 of 10 against Duke. In Miami, Miami pretty much had the game on lockdown by half. The effort was better in the second half, but the struggle it's a lot of struggle. Like I didn't even write a recap about the Duke game because I was like, it's the same story over and over. They can only really compete for about a half right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is something that I wrote down in the doc too, and I think Jake and I were talking about it after the game versus Duke. This is the same template of game that the men's team has played versus every good to great team that they have faced in the
Mm-hmm.
last year and a half. Right? They keep it close for whatever standard period time.
For a little bit, and then that's
In the
yeah.
like mostly
Well,
usually it's a half, and then they get crushed in a quarter, regardless of where that quarter is in the 4 quarter system for the women. They
Yeah.
get just dumpstered in a quarter, and then they lose by double digits consistently.
well,
It's happened so many times.
I will say the one thing that makes the Miami game a little bit different is that came first, right? That was in the second quarter before,
Yeah.
halftime when things kind of got out of control. They get back into the game in the second half and they played pretty well. They played a half a good basketball against Miami
They
and
did.
half a good basketball against Duke. They just didn't play them in the same game. The thing that makes the Miami
They technically
game,
did it. They technically did do it 4 quarters in a row. If you count the second half of the Miami game and the first half of the Duke game, that's
yeah,
not how it works.
with a 2 day long break in the middle. But
Yeah.
I think the thing that makes the Miami game frustrating is that's a team we've matched up pretty well with in the past when Georgia Tech has been a big burly defensive team, really effective on the glass, forcing not free throws. Gosh, breaking the press, all that good stuff. Miami's been pretty effective at being defensive. And it's made for entertaining games, close games. The series is 4-7, but I think the total point differential is 2 over the last 7 years. So that should give you a sense of it being a pretty close matchup, even though it's not 5-6.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it's just frustrating to see Miami finally figure out the offense thing because they played pretty effective offense the entire time, and maybe that's just a sign that Tech's defense isn't what it's been.
Yeah, they have mental stuff too still to work through. Like the Miami had a 12-0 run in that first quarter to finish, and that just about did them in. Then finished 40-23 up at half. If it weren't for Kayla going for 8 points in the third quarter, in the third quarter, it'd be a different game because that was at least that was just something to work off of.
Yeah.
And then I mean we were up against Duke by one at half. Should have been more. The defense got lax at the end and gave up a free bucket that shouldn't have happened. And then, I mean, Tech scored 15, 13, and 13 in the first 3 quarters, which is not awful for them. Like last year, that was fine because they would allow somewhere between 7 and 12 points a quarter, but then allowed 25 in the third, and then scored 6 in the fourth. Like they just could not. They just, when they fall apart, they fall apart. Like, and even if they can get back into it somewhat, like against Miami, they don't have that. They don't have the gusto, or I mean, I would say they have the talent to make a big comeback in a game just because of Bianca and Cam's shooting ability, as we've seen in the first half of the season. Like they did it there, it was working, and now the offense is powered by Tony Morgan, Blackshear, and Kara Dunn. I think that's a point I didn't put up in the doc, but like Nell is just waiting for Kara to explode. Like she knows it's coming. Kara played 39 minutes or 38 minutes against Duke, like most minutes she's played all year.
No points though, but she was, what I would say is like she was your box to box midfielder putting up fires a lot of the time.
Yeah,
bring defensive intensity.
Yeah, I mean she had the worst plus minus, but she played like a ton of minutes. Like she played it the whole freaking game. Turnovers have been an issue too, just across the board. Hermosa had 4. Everyone had a turnover. All 8 players that played turned the ball over. Like you just can't have it. Can't have it.
And to your point about them sort of collapsing hard, I'm looking at the game flow right now. There's a stretch in the third quarter where they go ice cold for like 3 or 4 game minutes. And then the entire fourth quarter, they just don't score a point for 6 minutes.
Duke scored 9 of their last 11 buckets in that quarter.
They just pulled away. Like Duke just pulls away, as starting with 9 minutes left in the third quarter, and they just hit the gas.
Yep.
I don't know if I straight up said this after the Louisville game. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. I think the thing that makes this the most frustrating after 7 years, I'd say a long time fan, is the fact that like seeing in Louisville, Liz Dixon, and yesterday Elizabeth Balogun, and granted, don't get me wrong, they left for the right reasons and had every right to. This is not an indemnity on them or anyone who transfers. Everyone who does it for their reasons, and I don't think it was a poor decision or at all or anything like that. But it's just
especially given the context.
Yeah. Oh,
especially
absolutely.
Given the context.
Especially given the context. I want to not mince any words about that. But man, just like Liz Dixon had an effective game against us. And Balogun yesterday, for those that don't know, the two of them were both freshmen at the same time at Georgia Tech, 2 very highly touted recruits, 2 of the most talented recruits Tech has ever gotten, frankly, and to see them both starting for other ACC teams, Balogun going 5 for 7 in 26 minutes, 2 for 3 from the free throw line, 5 rebounds, 12 points overall, and their most effective plus minus at plus 21. I mean, it's talent that used to be Georgia Tech, and that's experience, being a COVID senior now, I believe, because I'm old, so relatively
both of them are COVID seniors
this year. So that's experience, right? Experience is something that like you can have, a super talented Kara Dunn, and it's great to have like Tony Morgan is super fun to watch play, but like to have a really talented older player and to not have that it's tough, right? And that's where we're still seeing the effects of not only this year, kind of before the season, of us talking about, we haven't seen Nell Fortner ball yet, TM, right? She's inherited what she had. There's even stuff that we're feeling the effects of that she didn't even get to inherit, right? Not to go down the rabbit hole, but like, Balogun and Dixon played with Francesca Pon, who feels like a million years ago. Like this is still after effects of the Josephs fallout, which, goodness, feels like forever.
Well, so let's put these games in perspective, shall we? The men's and women's teams have combined for, let's see, 1 ACC win over 22-23. The men's team is now second to last in the ACC at 1-6 in the conference, 8-9 overall, and the women's team is dead last at 9-9 overall and 0-7 in conference. Let's talk about job security. I think it's it's difficult to discuss it. I think both of these coaches are, they have big personalities. They're very friendly. They're very good locker room presences. But I think in Pastor's case, specifically the finances and the current football situation that's gone on make it a little bit impossible to let him go at this point. But I don't
Remarkably
know
infeasible.
what you
Not impossible, just remarkably infeasible.
fiscally inflexible, to borrow a Alex Anthopoulos. I just don't know what you do here at this point, right? They play the exact same game. They make the exact same mistakes. He's a very good locker room guy. I think, Jake, we had this conversation a couple of men's basketball games ago. He's a very relatable. He's a cool guy, despite making multiple millions of dollars from our three collective alma mater. And it's something that's very good in recruiting. It's something that's very good to sell to fans. But at
I love
some point,
Pastner.
he's got to.
He's a great guy.
No.
Love him.
Yeah. But at some point, I'll be the bad guy here if I have to be, being the data-driven NBA type. But at some point, the point is to win basketball games, right? I don't want to be mean, but
you play to win the game.
You have to win ACC basketball games, and he's not.
Sometimes he doesn't even win SoCon games.
I want to kick it to you first, Jake, because you're the one that said outright you love Josh Pastner. What is your take on where he sits and what type of hot seat he sits on?
By the nature of Georgia Tech's finances, his seat is not nearly as hot as it would have been had Jeff Collins not been an absolute clown on the football field.
Wow,
right?
This is a very interesting paired case study you can do here, huh?
Literally, Josh Pastner's job security isn't, obviously ACC championship, great. Don't talk to me about the flukes. We still won. I saw it happen with my own eyes. Anyways, that was a fun year. Loved it. But if Jeff Collins had not successfully incinerated $23 million of shiny Georgia Tech money, I don't think Josh Pastner would make it after this season, barring some miraculous improvement, sweep the rest of the ACC, win the conference tournament, something like that, right? And I think that's more of a statement about Georgia Tech than it is about Pastner, because I don't think that his style and his play has fundamentally changed. I think that it has become very difficult to be Georgia Tech with the reported amounts of commitment that are going to this program, whether that's basketball renovation type needs and the locker room, or the scuttlebutt about NIL or lack of it. This is the world we live in, and if we're not gonna be big time, I mean, this is a reflection on that. If you demand current Pastner level results, you're going to get current Pastner level results, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I'm trying to be devil's advocate.
Devil's avocado.
Devil's avocado. Yeah.
Damn. Gave the meme name of the term.
Yeah. I'm trying to be the antithesis to my own point, right? I think Pastner is a good guy. I think he's had some success here. I enjoy his press conferences, and he's really easy to root for. But that being said, I think that there would be a different story around it if there was more fervor, right? If they were coming straight off the Paul Hewitt years, or straight off the Bobby Cremins years, we're looking a lot closer to the attitude around Georgia Tech from the Whack-Hyder days. It's just different.
Let me offer a little bit more color and a little bit more negativity, as is my usual. The only thing keeping Josh Pastner off of the bottom of the ACC right now is a historic collapse by Louisville.
This is true.
And I mean,
this is true.
Historic. They are winless in conference play, and they are like 300 plus in Ken Palm.
I didn't know it was possible for an ACC team to be that bad, by the way.
I will Jack, if you want to look up the actual Ken Palm thing while I say a
Yeah.
thing, that would be fantastic. But like Josh Baster is just hovering around 500, if not just slightly below it, in like 100. What is it? Like 200 something games, 100 something games,
Something like
over
that.
what, 7 years, 6 years, 6 full seasons, 6.5 seasons. It's this ends up being something like Nebraska's situation with head coaches in football, and I promise this has a point. Uh, somewhere along the line, they went from historic winner to a guy that didn't win enough. So a guy that didn't win enough but was good, and then
Hi, Paul Hewitt.
perennial hater to perennial nice guy to Scott Frost, right? It's just such a weird eclectic mix of, I'm not saying Brian Gregory was a bad guy, but you have this line of just mediocre results that leads to nice guy in the locker room. Like who's going to be Scott Frost then? Like, are you going to
That's not a
hire?
good comparison.
I'm
God,
not saying it's a good comparison.
Not that it's not apt. It's apt, but we do not want to hire Scott Frost.
I don't want. I don't
to
want
do
Georgia
that.
Tech
I
to
think
hire.
he's just pointing out the tea leaves that have existed in the past.
I'm
Here are the
not saying
teams.
that Georgia Tech is going to hire Scott Frost. They already did something like that for football, and we can unpack
Yes.
that at a later date.
We've
But
learned our
like,
lesson elsewhere.
well, I don't know about that.
I hope.
We're going to come back to that at some point. But like,
Do you want the Ken Palm?
yes, please give me the Ken Palm because this will help
The
me solidify my point.
The team ranked ahead of Louisville is Dartmouth. They're 7-12. The team ranked behind Louisville is Illinois Chicago. They're 9-10. Louisville is number
Flames.
283.
Oh wow.
Where's Tech by chance?
Georgia Tech is 140, right in front of Towson, right behind Longwood.
Dude, you cannot. I know the ACC is bad at men's basketball this year. I know, and I also know that I'm not a huge like basketball understander like I am maybe with football. This is a bad ACC year, and he's still 140th in Ken Palm.
I will note this in the Ken Palm, we have the 257th worst luck in the country by his luck rating. So
which is fair.
That's something.
Do they have an adjusted record, like a luck adjusted record?
What's this adjusted adjusted efficiency margin? That's not it. No, not really. Not really. The only ranking that we're like good at is adjusted schedule strength rating. We're 45th. And opposing adjusted average offense of opposing offenses is we're 18th best in the country. So
I think part of that is we just
or is that
play in the
18th worst?
ACC.
Oh, this might be 18th worst. Sorry, I can't tell. I don't know.
But part of that, but part of all of that is like Tech plays in the ACC, right? Like some of those strength of schedule metrics are going to be inflated just because they play in the ACC, and in a normal year, a bunch of these teams, your Syracuses, your Virginias, your Dukes, your North Carolinas, are not, 4-3 in conference like Duke is.
Yeah.
So
let's have that be forever, though. I would like Duke to be terrible for the rest of time. Anyway.
Oh, I hope that Duke and North Carolina are bad forever. But if they are bad, if they are in this mediocre state forever, that means you should be, come on, like at least pretend like there is some competition there. And instead, I'm not really looking forward to playing Duke. I think Duke and Carolina are both home games. Not really.
We already played Carolina on the road, so
yeah, Duke is at home.
Well, I was half right, so that's just about what Josh Baster's win percentage is, so we're going to move on. Mr. Purdy, Nell Fortner, this is year 4.
Yeah.
I don't think she loses her job, and I don't think she should lose her job over this year.
I only have it in the doc just because we're seeing two very similar things happen in both locker rooms right now in terms of win-loss and just how everything looks, and how things just haven't necessarily. Things started really good for the Jackets, I think, on the women's side, like better than I think we would have expected. We didn't really know how the Bianca and Cam thing was going to work out. We knew what they were capable of, and they showed that, I think, pretty reliably early on. And Tony Morgan was a surprise, like, oh, she's here. And I think in our preview pod, we're like, okay, we know we got Noguera, we know we got Dunn, we know we got Tony. how often will we see them, if we'll see them, and this is assuming Ilya Love and Nerea Hermosa were at 2021, 2020, 2022 levels as well. And so a lot has kind of blown up in her face, I would say. That wasn't necessarily her fault. We have no additional information on what Lily Love went through or why she's no longer on the team, but fair to say that was not expected to happen. You don't plan on someone having to be removed from the team. And Hermosa effectively taking a massive step backwards in her ability to stay on the floor as a reliable rebounder and keep the ball in her hand. And then Bianca and Cam went so ice cold they got benched. So, it's none of it's. I don't want to say it's her fault, but it's just she's having to manage a lot of just pieces. A lot of it. There's not much to know. There's nothing stable right now. With the team is I guess what I mean there. The big positive is that the freshmen are getting a whole lot of minutes, and they are the future of this team. Yep. So, in theory, that might mean next year's team will just be more cohesive and know what to do off the jump because they've gotten hundreds of additional minutes, I think, than what was planned.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next. It's like the one good thing that you can pull out of this is that core of Noguero, Dunn, and also Wonarina. Like all three of them, even though Wonarina
shown
is a
up
freshman,
in a big way.
Even though she's not a freshman, and Morgan, I forgot to mention Morgan. All four of them getting a lot of minutes and getting a lot of experience and looking, not necessarily not bad, but at least competent in ACC competition, which is pretty good. I mean, I think that's a spark and that's a bright spot, and it's something to look forward to as you move into sort of like, okay, well, I'll check back in on this team. And what their growth looks like in 23-24. And I think one could have feasibly said before this season that this was always going to be a transition year. I don't think it's necessarily revisionist history to say that.
No.
Right? They lost major pieces from last year. The entire starting five on
at this point, the whole starting five
game
is
one
starting. Yeah.
Yeah, the entire starting five from game one of this year was different
Tony Morgan
from the last game. Well, okay, so four of the five pieces in the interim have changed.
Yeah.
And the entire starting five on day one this year was different from day one last year, or not day one last year, but the end of last year, for the most part.
Yeah,
there's a lot. Hermosa might have been the one one remaining one holder of a piece.
Yeah, Hermosa was the last one that was stayed there, and then Lily Love got starting game 3 or 4. But yeah, in terms of game one, it was just Hermosa.
Okay, well,
weird that Lily wasn't starting based on her, really good.
Well, that one,
but really bad. She's not on the team anymore.
It was clear. It was clear in the Clayton's 8 exhibition game that she was not ready to start a basketball game. So
yeah,
it's
just. I think what you could say for the women's team is Nell is not going to get fired. If Nell gets fired, that is not particularly good. I don't think athletic administration job. And 23-24 is going to be an interesting look. I think you could sort of write this one off. I don't like saying that to seasons, but you can sort of say, okay, well, she got dealt a bad hand.
Priorities have now shifted now that I think plans transition with some senior talent to still power through to something in terms of maybe a late add to the NCAA tournament or something like that. That just no longer is that should not still be the goal because I don't think that's possible anymore.
I also looking at the schedule and looking at some of the losses that they've taken, I just don't think it's feasible.
No, I don't. NIT, sure, but yeah, anyway.
We'll see. Last point, because this is in our doc. Jack, you asked the question: is this the worst combined stretch in Tech basketball? And here, before we actually get into the stats here, at least in Jake and I's limited experience, I guess that's 8 years for me, 7 years for me, 6 years for Jake.
This is my seventh season.
Okay, so 8 for me. This is they've both been bad. They've both been really, really bad. I don't think that they've ever been this bad in the memory, the institutional memory that either of us have.
I will say the kind of thing that we kind of hang our hat on, I guess, as being like horrible, terrible collapse is the end of the last season of Joseph's. And having just gone and looked back at that the other day, at least they sprung some more wins in the middle of that. So yeah, it's tough, and it's okay to feel like this has been a tough year, I'd say.
Jack, before we head to a quick break, give me the actual worst combined stretches.
So this is the worst in 10 years. Both teams had a simultaneous 5-game losing streaks in January of 2013. Save us, the men beating Miami, we would have been in that exact situation again this December-January stretch. The actual worst was 1980-1981. The men went 1-21 from December 20th through the rest of the year, and the women went 2-11 from November 28th to January 26th.
What you can't hear is me cussing on mute.
So it's been since the 80s that we've looked simultaneously this bad. In 05-06, there was something pretty similar, at least in a limited time frame. The men were 2-13 to finish, and the women were 3-14 to finish. But that's still two more. That's 5 wins total. So like a lot. Still, that feels a lot better than the 1980-81 stretch. And then both were not that great in 79 and 80, but I just credit that to the women being a fresh team because that was their 3rd season of existence. So
at least 05-06, you could probably make a reasonable argument that everyone from that 03-04, those 03-04 and those
right.
04-05 teams that made deep tournament runs, you could say that everyone graduated and that was a step back.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is,
and I will say one thing about 1980, they were still being coached by the equivalent of the club sports director. So
yeah,
take that.
They were supposed to lose.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've hit a good stopping point on our basketball discussion. We'll see the men's team back in action on the 17th, so that's Tuesday at 7 p.m. versus NC State, and the women will be back in action on Thursday, the 19th at 7 p.m. versus Syracuse. We will be back in action after this short break.
Yeah, as always, Scions of the Southland is brought to you in partnership with Section 103. Section 103 is the best place to find Georgia Tech gear, so feel free to check them out at section103.com and at Section 103 on Twitter. One thing I do want to note as we look towards baseball and softball season is they are back with baseball and softball shirts with the great baseball sleeve cuts and also the Tech retro-inspired zip up. I have the zip up. I am wearing it constantly around the house, just not tonight because it's in the wash, which is very sad. But definitely go check them out. Free shipping on orders over $70. It is our favorite place to buy Georgia Tech apparel for sure.
Welcome back to Scions of the Southland for Monday, January 16th. Let's talk tennis. They started their seasons this past weekend, actually, but we wanted to do a quick preview before they get into the meat of the schedule. Mr. Grant, let's start with the women. Tell me about their 2022.
Yeah, so last year in the spring, Georgia Tech went 8-5 in the ACC, 15-11 overall. I'd say that there were signs of improvement throughout. It's a team that had lost quite a bit from the year before. Spring of 21 saw the last ride of some talent that had been with Tech a long time, and 22 figured to be kind of the figuring it out period. That being said, they did wind up, like I said, 8-5 in the ACC. It got them a bye through the first round of the ACC tournament. They beat Boston College in a sweep. In the second round, they lost to Miami 4-3 in the quarters. For some context, Miami has been top 25 and improving over the last 2 years. So spoiler alert, you'll hear about them in our upcoming preview for 2023. As for the NCAA tournament, they did sneak back in. Georgia Tech has been pretty much a mainstay in women's tennis. Again, it's the only sport that Tech has won an officially recognized NCAA championship back in, I believe, 2007. And they did have a heartbreaking loss in the second round, at Auburn on the road. They played Memphis at Auburn in the first round and won, I believe, 4-1 off the top of my head. In terms of returners, you've got most of the lineup back. Carol Lee, who is probably Tech's far and away court one in singles, who's been in the ITA brackets and the NCAA individual brackets very recently herself. Did not play this weekend. Georgia Tech went up to Columbia, South Carolina to play South Carolina, Wisconsin, and Wake in split weekends. Played fairly well, I'll add, but Carol Lee only played doubles, so will be an instant add to what was already figuring to be a pretty solid lineup. In addition to her, you've got Kyla Bilchev, Kate Sherabura, Ruth Marsh, Rosie Garcia-Gross, Ava Roster, and Monica Dadaj. Dadaj and Garcia-Gross are your seniors. Everyone else has at least 1 year left, sometimes 2, and then you've got newcomer Alejandra Cruz, who was playing mid-court in singles and doubles, so great to see.
I need to let you take a breath because that was a lot. The color that I'll add is that Sharabura Lee is probably is Tech's one doubles court pairing, and they are really, really good. I think when we were preparing for this episode, you were saying, hey, I've written Sharabura Lee in as much volume as you were writing Jones and Flores a couple of years ago, just for how good and how nationally renowned they are.
Yeah, and before that, Hurrigan and Jones too, for all the old heads out there. But yes, Sharabura and Lee did make a deep run in both tournaments, and it's great to see them getting potentially not just 1 but 2 more seasons on the flats.
Expectations. We prepared for this episode talking about them as sort of a preseason top 25. They did not host an ITA kickoff weekend this year. They were not in the top 16. Where do we think the chips are going to fall for this team with basically the same roster, with the addition of Cruz in the middle of the court seedings? Where do you think they fall?
The ACC is kind of a bloodbath. This team could go 8-5 again in league play, and that would be something to hang their hat on. Tech, as we mentioned, is number 25. UNC's at 2, NC State's at 3, Duke's at 6, Virginia's at 7. That's 4 ACC teams in the top 10, and Miami's at 11. So it's going to be scary. The rest of the way through the ACC, they're going to need to pick up wins, especially with how many great teams they're playing. Just in general, you need to be above 500 in your games or matches, just like you do in, say, men's basketball, trying to make it to the NCAA tournament. I think Cruz slotting in to the middle of the lineup is a great sign. It shows that this team's going to have more depth at the top. The kind of flip side to that, though, is asking where Ava Roster's at. She's on the roster. We've seen her play a couple of years at Tech. She's typically been a court 3-ish type player. So you'd like to have Cruz, sliding in there and bumping everyone else down. But, if that means that you're losing another player due to injury or what, who knows what, I honestly can't even speculate. I don't know what's going on, but would be nice to know there. That being said, they looked really good this weekend in Columbia, and they're definitely going to get tested early and often. They'll be out in Berkeley this coming weekend for ITA kickoff, as you mentioned, and Berkeley is sitting right at number 12. It's who they're figuring to play in the second round, should they win against, I believe, San Diego in the first.
Just to add a little bit more to some of that, and with the ITA rankings, Carol Lee at 10 overall in the last singles rankings that came out in November. As I tab through this, Alejandra Cruz was 104. Mahak Jain at 109, Kylie Bilchev at 111. And then in the doubles rankings that came out in November, Lee and Sharabura are tied for 53rd nationally. They were 1 at one point. They were ranked first overall at one point. But I think their tournament performance may have put a dampener on that. That is what I have for you in terms of the individual players, in terms of the team. In the preseason rankings, like we mentioned before, Tech was top 25 at 25 with a bunch of ACC teams ahead. I'm just looking at this now: UNC, Miami, Duke, Virginia. I'm not even going to bother. Just think of most State. Of the bunch of the ACC is in that mix. It's going to be, like you said, a bloodbath. Mr. Purdy, let's flip over to the men's side of Ken Byers. Tell me about their 2022.
So probably not as high as the women, but they still have some really, really great players. Andres Martin obviously is the the top guy in the bunch. He reached number 9 in singles in the fall and number 12 last spring. Marcus McDaniel and Martin, they both won the ITA Southeast Regional doubles title last season. And then I was there for this at the Atlanta Open, which we potted about in July. Martin got to be the collegiate invite for the Atlanta Open, and he beat the number 69th ranked Thanasi Kokkinakis as a wild card. So we've got some ATP winner on the team now. In Martin, returning squad: Keshav Chopra, Martin, Brandon McKinney, and Marcus McDaniel. Newcomers that I could find: Rohan Sachdev, who played pretty well on this past weekend against Furman, listed as a sophomore from Purdue, so I guess he's a transfer. Another one in that bucket is Gabrielle Brancatelli, Tennessee, sophomore as well. And then 2 freshmen, and Elias Shokri and Robert Bauer. So no team rankings or anything like that with these guys. Martin will be high up there on the singles part. Against Furman this past weekend, he won handedly. So outside of the Martin and McDaniel doubles pairing and Martin individually in singles, that's where the power will be and where any postseason possibilities will come about. But
how the hell is Martin? How the hell are Martin and McDaniel still juniors?
Yeah, that's the thing.
COVID.
There's no
rule.
Brandon McKinney is the only senior on this team, so like there's a lot of if this year is good, I'm really excited for next year too. Hoping they stick
here's
around.
the thing. We've been saying that this team is young for at least 3 years now.
Yes. It
Dude,
drives me nuts because every year I'm like, okay, this is it.
And they get a COVID year, right? Like, there's 2 years of this in theory left. Like, nothing.
Time is so dumb.
It's lovely. I mean, the team lost some heartbreakers early in the fall. In last year, couldn't fully figure it out. Was that last year or in the spring?
No, I would say in the spring.
Okay.
Georgia Tech took a string of 4-3 losses in ACC play.
Oh Lord, that's right. Now I'm remembering. Yeah.
One was on the road at Louisville. That was tough. I think we lost another 4-3 Notre Dame, but maybe that one was 5-2. You get the point. It was real, just kind of unfortunate, and that's kind of like the way literally the ball bounces sometimes in tennis. I think it's one of the reasons that I'm at least looking at the Furman results and being like, really, Marcus McDaniel, you lost to a Furman guy? Is because my expectations for this team have been for them to take the next step now off of what I would say was overperformance from Martin and McDaniel early in their career. And I just don't think we've seen them take that next step yet. The potential is there.
Yeah.
I think it's something that the fact that they're back in the ITA kickoff field is really great, and they'll get some quality play early. But, I said it in 2018. I am 100% positive I said it spring of 2018. They're close. And in 2019, they upset a really good ranked NC State team and maybe came close to doing it against Tennessee as well. Can't remember the exact result of the Tennessee match, but it was just one of those okay, they finally did it. They broke through, and it just doesn't seem like they've been able to sustain momentum, be it due to tough losses or just untimely bounces and things that come down to splitting hairs. So team's got a lot of potential, I think is the thing to highlight rather than they came so close so many times last year, but they did, right? They've been close.
The thing I wanted to add while we were still talking about the roster, and before I realized that Andres Martin and Marcus McDaniel were still juniors, which is still giving me a headache. Andres Martin, number 72 in the last ITA singles rankings that came up.
There you go.
He is the only Georgia Tech player that comes up in my search. I think this is out of 125 athletes. So that's in terms of your individual pairings. Tech is obviously not ranked in the top 25, but they are in the top 64 because they are in the ITA kickoff weekend field. So Keep that in mind. Jack, you were at the Furman match. We already talked about this a little bit because Jake mentioned the Andres Martin situation. Give me some more color on that.
I got there right as doubles was ending. We won doubles those matches, and then singles wise, Andres was great. It was great. Easy looking match. Marcus McDaniel was the highlight. He was down 5-0 or 5-1, and then won 9 straight games to win the first set 7-5, and then was up 2-1 or 2-0 before finally losing a game in the second set, and came out with the win. So. I mean, we won 6-1, but it was looking a little dicey for a second there. when he was just not finding it. But then tennis is a funny game. How you can just turn around in a second and the momentum is all on your side. They played on the indoor courts because it was very cold and very windy outside. But there was a lot of people there. Furman's a close drive, so there's plenty of Furman folks there as well, which is cool to see. Families seeing each other for the first time in a while. The families tend to know each other a little bit more in tennis just because there's only so many people involved. So they've got some kind of, I don't want to say cupcake matches, but they don't have the tough ACC grind that they'll have coming up between Presbyterian, the Citadel, and somebody else. They've got every North Carolina ACC team is ranked, and they got to play all of them. And then Virginia's number 1. So gonna be fun.
The ACC in tennis is just, it's brutal on both sides. But any other notes on the tennis teams, Mr. Grant, Mr. Purdy?
Go watch Chris Eubanks on ESPN something.
Yeah. It's probably going to be on the plus. Speaking of additional items, let's hit hockey and volleyball on the way out. Mr. Grant, tell me about the Savannah Hockey Classic.
Yeah, Savannah Hockey Classic has been going on for, I believe, 24 years, 23 years. It was first contested in 1999. It is a tournament pitting FSU, Florida, UGA, and Georgia Tech against, I guess, the in-state rivalries are played and the conference rivalries are played. So Tech does not play UF. FSU does not play UGA. But that being said, they usually wind up shaking things out nicely for everyone to be 2-0, 0-2, and then 2 teams 1-1. This year, that 2-0 team was UF. They beat Georgia close and then I would say demolished FSU. Tech walks away with a split weekend. They went 1-1, beating FSU 4-1 and falling to UGA 2-1, very close, and definitely an improvement over their previous showing against the rivals from Athens. Tech has won the Thrasher Cup, which is the prize awarded to the winning team, I believe 8 times in the number of times it's been awarded. So relatively successful, but Florida walks away with it for the second straight year.
Last note on the Savannah Hockey Classic, that is contested at the new Savannah Hockey Arena, End Market Arena, that hosts the Savannah Ghost Pirates, who I believe are in the ECHL. Mr. Purdy, tell me about volleyball transfers.
Got a possible replacement for the middle blocker spot, which is where Brilliant Morissette was leaving, and I think Aaron Moss as well. With Deandra Pierce. She was a freshman at Texas. We're the national champs. She only came in for a game this year, but there's a hole in that spot, and so we're going to need her. She was in from the Rumble, not the Rumble C, that's our website, the Rambling Wreck press release. She went to Austin High School, 2-time All-District player, named to the AVCA High School All-Region team, 68 kills, 29 blocks in her senior year of high school. So another we're pulling a lot of people from the Texas area in terms of basketball and volleyball, which is fun to see. They got a lot of, I mean, it's basically a country anyway, so they got enough people down there to distribute around the world.
Was literally a country at one point, mind you.
Yes, quite literally. That's why I like making that joke. So yeah, another possible piece to fit in the middle. We'll see how it pans out. Collier, I mean, we know she got another freshman, I think, from Texas coming as well. No, this is the freshman.
I think in that case it's the state. I think in that case it's the state, not the university. But yeah, I digress.
Yes. There's a high school. Believe there's a high school grad coming out of a high school in Texas as well. So we'll have a couple from there. And then I think there might be. I would assume there has to be more announcements in terms of players coming because there's still a lot of holes to fill in the back and front court. So.
Okay, I think that about wraps it up for us tonight. We are running a little bit long, but Mr. Grant, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, thanks again, as always, for listening. You can find us wherever fine podcasts are distributed, and we do appreciate any comments, rating, reviewing, all that good stuff. We read all of them and definitely incorporate what we see into the podcast. That being said, you can also drop us a line at fromtherumbleseat@gmail.com if email is more your thing. You can find all of our past episodes and all of the articles that go out with these fine podcasts at fromtherumbleseat.com. Comment there as well. You can find us as well as our fellow writers who put out a lot of great content on football, basketball, baseball, and all the other sports as well. Best place to get all of that content is fromtherumbleseat.com. You can also find us on Twitter at FTRS blog, at Jake Grant 98, at Jack Nicholas. And you can find Section 103 at Section 103 as well on Twitter and at their website, section103.com. If you are an Instagram fan or Facebook fan, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at From the Rumble Seat. Both of those platforms are growing, so join us there. And as always, until next week, good night, good luck, and go Jackets.